Hi, my name is Catherine Zeich. I'm the Director of Marketing here at the Conrad, Washington, D.C. So happy to be hosting David and Leo. We've been hosting them for the past few months, and it's been a really wonderful partnership. Just a bit about the Conrad. We're fully opened. We're a brand new hotel welcoming local guests as well as guests from out of town.
Yep.
And very happy to see you. We're going to get started in just a few minutes, and we hope you enjoy the show.
Hey, welcome back. I can't believe it's August already, but we are here once again with the myth, the legend, David Howell, to unpack the stats. And first and foremost, wanted to encourage you, the audience, to make sure you push your comments, your questions to the, through the chat, and we will make sure we, do our very best to unpack some of the questions that you have and give you the answer. So, David, it's a pleasure to be here again with you.
Always a privilege.
Obviously, I'm a little bit tan, as you can tell. They had to reduce, adjust the light here for us. But I can't believe it's August, man. We've been doing this for 7 months now.
Yeah, hard to believe.
And it never gets old, never gets old. And today, though, I wanted to maybe take a little bit of a different spin on the statistics and really look forward while also looking back at 2020 and seeing, okay, not just what happened in 2020, but what are we projecting potentially for the rest of this year. And so I asked you to maybe adjust your number just a little bit, adjust your data just a little bit, so we can equip our agents, equip the audience that we have tuning in to properly disseminate this information to their clients, but also prepare them for the rest of the year. So you've been so grateful to us, and we're glad again to be here with you.
It's an honor for me.
Yeah. So I want to jump right in because we have a lot of stuff to cover here. But one of the things that you and I talked about earlier was so many people look back, to predict the future, when in reality they should be looking at what's in front of them now to predict the future, and then look back. And so one of the things that you and I discussed is well, how do we properly do that? And so I want to maybe just kind of give you the floor and to help our audience understand some of the resources that you have with BrightMLS and how you've utilized that in your own personal study of the stats, and how that obviously affects our agents that we're serving.
No, thanks, Leo. I appreciate it. I think it's safe to say that as practitioners in this business, there is no shortage of information that's coming at us from every direction. And part of what we try and do is take all that information and turn it into something that is useful to our agents and for our clients. I think you framed it very well. It's great to look back to know where the market's been. It's an entirely different proposition to try and make some educated guesses about where the market's going. So we take into account a number of resources, and we do some of our own stuff, and I'll talk about that as well too. But I'll use NAR as an example. NAR produces some wonderful statistical reports, and they've got brilliant research economists that do what they do. This is not a dig at NAR, but by the time they put out a pending home sales index, for example, it is typically 2 months old. And it's absolutely accurate information, but we know how fast this market moves.
Yeah.
Another thing that we look at is the Case-Shiller Home Price Index, which is also a brilliant piece of economic work, but it is 4 to 6 months old information. So it really doesn't tell us much about what's going on right now. So among the resources that we take a look at, one that's relatively recent that our regional multiple listing system, BrightMLS, has come up with in partnership with a company called T3 out on the West Coast. They're a real estate consultancy, and it's the BrightMLS Home Demand Index. And I expect there are a lot of subscribers that aren't even aware that it exists. And among the things it does is it takes advantage of data streams that only Bright has. Bright obviously knows what, as a practitioner, I'm searching for. If I had buyer clients, Bright knows what those clients, the saved searches that are being sent to those clients. Bright has access to lockbox and showing information that, and those data streams don't exist anyplace else. That is really current, real-world information about what buyers are actually doing right now. And they've taken that along with T3 to turn it into this home demand index, and they produce heat maps, and it's a screenshot on the slide here that does by zip codes to show where the hottest areas are now and are likely to be in the near-term future. Another thing that Bright did early on in COVID, so that we could really get an idea about what was going on in the market right now, is they do a series of weekly stats. And it's a data dump, but it also gives us some real insight as to what's actually occurring in the market just in the past week, and we'll talk about a little bit of that stuff. as you and I have been talking about for months now, there's a lot of stuff that we do internally as well to our own research. Some of it is public facing, and some of it is more facing for our agents. But we produce some stuff every month that we call Stat Pack. In addition to having, frankly, way too many statistics, it always starts with a one-page summary of what's actually going on in the market right now, and it ends with the direction of the market for that particular area. And our crystal ball, which we've talked about before, Barry Habib has one, I don't, but we hopefully are fairly accurate about the near term, about what's likely to take place. We do a deep dive on absorption rates, and that's really granular information down to the zip code or community level, by property type and by price range. And we always do a rolling 4-month look at that of absorption rates. None of these things independent of themselves really tell us the whole story of a market, but hopefully together they give us a better idea about where the market has been recently and therefore where it's likely to go. And one of the things that we've just put out, we actually just put on our website, is our market report for the first half of 2021. And it's not a commercial message, but it's out there for anybody to see. And we've done a little bit of a different spin, kind of consistent with what you and I are talking about right now, is it's not just a look back at the last 6 months, but taking that information, as well as all the other things that we've talked about here, and a lot of other sources of information, and trying to make some projections about where the market is likely to be over the second half of this year. And just kind of set the table for that. An awful lot of the look back of the first half of this year compared to the first half of last year, the numbers are silly, because the first half of last year, 2 or 3 months of that was the COVID slump. And so kind of by definition, everything looked better in the first half of 2021 compared to the first half of last year.
Well, let's touch on that. I mean, I know that you said this is not a commercial for McEnearney, but you know, I really do think that you guys have done a phenomenal job of arming the agents with some incredible resources so that they can help consumers make educated decisions, right? And so let's get very practical on some of this external resources that you're talking about, like the internal stuff with the stat pack that you put out, the absorption rates, and also this market report that you're referencing. How should an agent, in your opinion, leverage these resources that are available to them right now, right? So the website, I think, is McEnearney.com / market-report. Right. So there it is, McEnearney.com / market report. But can you talk a little bit about that? Because I think before we kind of get into, okay, what does this mean for DC? What does this mean for Loudoun County? And start getting into the numbers, how can someone leverage that as an agent in helping their consumers?
That's a great question. I'm not sure I have a great answer, but I'll tell you where we start from as a foundation for why we produce the research that we do. It's the reason that we're here. We're here to serve our clients. And part of that service for the clients is to give them actionable information so that they can make an informed decision, or as much as they can. And we know there's always an emotional component to this. So this is not just about numbers, because that gets mind-numbingly dull. Perhaps like some of this exchange, but never.
You're not dull. So, you're not dull, Dave.
But it's to look at this information and to say, this is what's happened in the market recently. This is what's happening in the market right now. And what does that generally tell us about what's likely to happen in the near term? A really narrow example. If you were buying a house this week in Loudoun County, it really doesn't do you a heck of a lot of good to know what happened in Loudoun County in January. Might be nice to know, but it doesn't tell you what to do, because the market changes week to week, month to month, and sometimes even day to day. And so it's our job as practitioners to stay on top of this, and it's hard. We've got a research crew of about 4 people. It's not the only thing that they do, but I get to parrot the stuff that our people are producing and take advantage of great research from other outside sources to try and put this into a more digestible form than just charts and graphs.
Yeah, but to your point, right? So in my industry, right? So we're going to talk a little bit about interest rates later down the road. A consumer wants a low rate, right? A consumer is looking for, I mean, whether or not that's the correct way to to approach a buying process. That's what a consumer is looking for, at least their initial thoughts, right? Therefore, it is on me and it's my job to provide a very competitive low rate, right? And so that said, I think guidance also plays a role in that, right?
It does.
Low rate doesn't always mean a great strategy, right? Low rate doesn't always mean like, long-term benefits, right? In the same way, a consumer is looking ahead. They want to know, okay, great, that's awesome that happened the last year, in 2020 compared to this year. But what does that mean for me moving forward, right? And I think the report that you put together, the market report, really helps you as an agent give the consumer exactly what they're looking for. And maybe talk a little bit about this. Not a lot of organizations, I don't think anyone is putting out content like this.
Well, and you're kind of see that. Frankly, we're all trying to climb the same mountain and all trying to figure this market out. And there's lots of great companies in this marketplace, and none of this is criticism. In fact, it's complimentary because we look at what other people are doing as well too, and we try and always improve our product. And let me go back to your task in this business. You're right, it's not about rate. The amount of information you and your colleagues have to distill to help your clients make informed decisions. It's easy to say it's the lowest rate, but it may not be the best program.
Correct.
And by shifting a few dollars of down payment here or there, and sometimes less down payment, you end up with a much better deal. And it's hard, I'm sure, to walk consumers through that process when they're focused on rate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it is, and I mean, that's a great segue in terms of what's happening in the marketplace. I think context is everything, right? Yeah. So to be in the mid to high twos still today in August, it's an anomaly, David. Like,
Stunning.
Like for us to be able to borrow money at those low interest rates, it's unheard of, right? And now, how long is that going to last? I happen to think that we're probably going to see, a fluctuation in the market over the next few months, going into the first quarter of next year. But even if rates were to go up, let's say to the mid threes, it's still historically cheap, to buy interest. So to your point, most consumers are looking for the low rate, and that's important. As an organization, we need to follow through, right? And we have, Draper and Kramer has been very, very aggressive in terms of the actual pricing that we give our consumers. But the strategy and the wisdom is super important as well. Can you maybe add a little bit more color on rates in general from your perspective, from the real estate side? What are you seeing? What are your thoughts?
Well, this sounds like realtor speak to say to a buyer, this is a spectacular time to buy. Well, it is because rates are unbelievable. And depending on how much time we have today, and we may do this the next time, the fact that we have what amounts to a generation of homeowners who have taken advantage either of a purchase or a refinance at these incredibly low rates is going to have some long-term significant impact on the overall housing market, not just now and 6 months from now, but years from now. In terms of potentially locking in what might have otherwise been inventory, but we can talk about that a bit as well too. But certainly that's part of what's driven this very robust market is rates that are pretty close to the equivalent of giving money away.
Yeah, no, and to that point, I think a good segue would be like, okay, well let's talk then about the overall market, right? But let's approach it as, okay, what are you seeing for the second half of this year? How does that compare to 2020? And let's talk a little bit about how-tos in specific regions, maybe some tips for our agents. So, I mean, DC is, as you know, one of my favorite areas. So, that's logical for us to start there. Can you just give us a little bit of context? Okay, what have you seen over the last year? But let's start with, okay, what are you projecting forward for the rest of 2021?
Well, forgive me when I look down at some of my notes here because I don't remember all this stuff off the top of my head. But DC it's one of these things, it's not like the other. DC has the most consistent market in the metropolitan area. It has not had as big a swings up or down, even including in the bust 10 or 12 years ago. And that's holding true now as well too. So, one of the things that I talked about was the Bright weekly stats. One of the things that we look at is the relationship of the number of listings that are coming on the market versus the number of new contracts. And DC is most dissimilar to the rest of the region in this regard. We've had new contracts exceed the number of new listings coming on the market in DC in just 4 weeks out of the last 26. And what that simply means is that overall supply is growing. When you have more listings coming on, that's the supply. Then you have contracts, that's the demand. That you're starting to see a bit of a shift in the balance of supply and demand. So right now, DC has the largest overall supply of homes of any of our subregions in the market, and the market is starting to soften a bit. But as you know, I've talked about before, soften is not the same as soft. This is still a seller's market by any stretch of the imagination. It is stronger in DC for attached and detached homes, where the supply is right about a month, and we expect that may creep up to maybe 1.2 months. And because the supply is creeping up, it also moderates the upward pressure on home prices. DC had a significant jump in home prices in the first half of this year, and also compared to the first half of 2019, which is probably the more relevant comparison. But the slowest part of the market in DC that we've talked about before is the condo market. Our projection for the condo market is that the huge overhang of listings, meaning far more supply than there is demand, is starting to ease. One of the consequences of that big overhang in inventory in DC is prices for condos were flat in the first half of the year. Pretty stunning. It was about the only place in our market area where average prices were flat in 2021 compared to the same time in 2020. And that's simply because there were more sellers, would-be sellers, than buyers. We expect that to ease a little bit. So it may sound a little bit counterintuitive that the supply of attached and detached homes will go up a little bit. We think the relative supply of condos is actually going to go down a little bit. So for the first time in a while, we'll probably see a little upward pressure on condo prices.
That's interesting. So, so I think in terms of like the how-to practical advice for the agents is if a consumer is looking to buy a house, you know, or a first-time home buyer, is the condo market in DC a good opportunity? Still, I mean, it's shrinking a little bit, as you're saying, but it's still a good opportunity for them to take action.
And just in the last 2 or 3 weeks, we're now seeing more contracts of all home types in DC and frankly elsewhere, where we're actually seeing the buyers having a little bit of negotiating leverage. We're seeing, oh my gosh, home inspection contingencies. Not all the time by any means, but as you know, in the post-COVID boom towards the second half of last year, buyers were taking it on the chin. And while it's still relatively tough to be a buyer, it's one of the consequences of a softer market is buyers now have a little bit more negotiating room.
That's great.
Not always, but sometimes.
That's great, David. That's great. You know, I can't make this up. My friend Shirley McEnearney, obviously one of the agents that
Shirley.
We serve, she has a great question here. She says, I'm going to test David's ability to predict the future.
Okay, well, I'm out of here.
What is his prediction for sellers putting their home in the market, specifically in Reston and Alexandria in September and in October? What a great segue.
Yeah, it is. And we'll actually, Shirley, we'll get to Fairfax County in just a little bit, but I'll answer the question now. It's a good time to be a home seller in Reston because Reston is one of the hottest areas in the metropolitan area, and in particular in Fairfax County. And we'll talk about that in some detail. But before we move on from DC, and thanks for the interruption, Shirley. I'm just kidding. We think the hottest areas in DC, you're not going to be surprised anybody that knows the DC market, are likely to be the Logan Circle area, Adams Morgan, and certainly the whole upper northwest quadrant of AU Park and Spring Valley and Palisades and Chevy Chase. Those have been hot, and we think they'll continue to be the hottest areas of the market.
Wow, that's great. That's great. That's very specific advice within DC. Good. Let's go over to Alexandria. That's one of the cities that Shirley was talking about. Yep. Tell us a little bit about the city of Alexandria. What are your predictions moving forward, looking back?
Yeah, well, it's, you know, one of the things we also try and do with these numbers, Leo, is to put them in context, and I know it may be kind of hard to see on the screen, but although the detached home market in the city of Alexandria is the smallest part of the market because it's much heavier attached and condo market, as hot as the market has been in Alexandria, and it has been, there were just as many detached homes that sold in the first half of 2017 as did in the first half of 2021.
Wow.
So the market is hot, but part of the reason is that it feels hotter is it's not because of the demand, meaning contracts, it's because of the supply. There's simply a significant reduction in supply of detached homes. The same is true for attached homes in Alexandria as well too. And a bit like DC, the condo market in Alexandria is a bit softer. So a lot of what I say about Alexandria, I would say that I just said about DC as well too. We generally expect to see, since there's now more listings coming on the market than there are more new contracts, supply is starting to edge up just a little bit. And again, from any historical context, supply is still really, really tight. But it is starting to ease a little bit. And when you see some easing in supply, It means it's a little bit better for home buyers who are probably pretty fatigued at this moment. One of the things that we looked at with the Bright Home Demand Index, as well as our own absorption rates, is to try and get some sense of where the hottest areas in Alexandria are likely to be. Here's the good news is, the whole city's hot. It really is. But if we had to focus on one area in particular, it's the west end of Alexandria that's hotter than probably Old Town or the area up near Potomac Yards, closer to National Landing. And that may have to do with affordability as well, too. But again, the whole city's hot, but it's a little hotter. We think it's going to be a little hotter in the west end.
That's interesting. And let's go back to the resources, right? Because I want to cement this in people's mind, David. Statistics are just not, something we like read to just get smarter, right? There's actionable steps that we can take as business professionals, real estate agents, to be able to arm the consumers with, information so that they can take an intelligent decision. Yeah. And it's little things like this that you were talking about earlier, where it's like, hey, let's use the resources that are available to us to be able to guide our consumers correctly. That's wonderful. That's wonderful. Let's talk a little bit about Arlington County. Like, what's happening there? Like, how does that compare to other counties? Give us a little context.
Probably the biggest thing going on in Arlington right now is the condo market. Along with DC, it's the softest condo market in the region. There's a pretty significant overhang of condos, particularly for smaller units. And honestly, we don't expect to see much progress on that in Arlington. Again, it's not that the market's bad. It's just there's relatively more supply than there is demand. Stunningly little inventory for attached homes, for townhouses in Arlington. It's been the case. We think that will continue to be the case. But like the rest of the region, things are starting to ease up a little bit. There is relatively more supply of attached and detached homes, but not enough to change the equation. We're still going to characterize this as a seller's market. We think the hottest areas in Arlington for attached and detached homes are likely to be in the Clarendon Courthouse area and Country Club Hills, the 22207 zip code, that part of Arlington. And interestingly, we've seen an uptick in demand for what is purely a condo market, and that's the National Landing area.
Really?
Yeah, and it's purely speculation on my part. As Amazon is bringing more people back to work, there seems to be an uptick in interest in condos in that part of the market. As we've probably talked about before, there was an explosion in demand after Amazon's HQ2 announcement back in, November of 2018. Hard to believe it's been that long ago. And then it cooled off back to kind of more normal levels. We're seeing an uptick in demand. But I also saw yesterday, after we put these slides together, that Amazon announced that their back to work plan for Labor Day is getting pushed back to January. So even though there's not huge numbers of people that were going to be coming back to work, it's going to be interesting to see how that affects condo demand in the National Landing area. But we were really interested to see this uptick in interest.
That's very interesting, Dave. That's very specific. Yeah. Very interesting. And when you say we, you're not only talking about, you specifically, you're talking about the team of people that you have behind you, and obviously Bright as well, correct?
Yeah, you bet, absolutely. And I get to take this data stream from other folks and just get to parrot what people are feeding me, which is great. But no, we're blessed to have a really great team here that puts this stuff together. I used to do a lot of this myself. I don't do it anymore because there's frankly people that are better at it than I am. But what we try and do, and we frankly benefit enormously from the input from our agents, because we're, like every broker, we're trying to listen to what our agents are telling us about what's going on in the market today. And so our projections are pretty fluid as a consequence, just like the market's fluid.
That's wonderful. All right, Fairfax County, obviously, that's kind of the most.
Get to you, Shirley.
Shirley, we haven't forgotten about you. Please don't sign off. Let's talk a little bit about Fairfax County. Like, what are you seeing there? Like, you mentioned, you already mentioned a few things, within specific areas, but like, give us some context in terms of what's happening in Fairfax.
Well, Fairfax County, as we're now getting a little bit further from the city center, the markets start to look a bit different than they do in the closer in jurisdictions. So one of the things that's happening in Fairfax County, and just make sure I get the numbers right here, for a 9-month period of time through the middle of last year through the end of the first quarter of this year, the number of new contracts getting ratified significantly exceeded the number of new listings coming on the market. So supply was continuing to contract in Fairfax County. But 11 of the last 12 weeks, the reverse is true. So we're seeing a return of sellers to the market. There's relatively more listings coming on the market than there are new contracts being ratified. So that means that supply is growing. Not growing exponentially, it's not a huge shift, but it is a shift. And so when we say softer, soft is a relative term, that kind of migration is good for buyers. So softer, I'd probably have to come up with a better word than saying softer, but the scales are changing a little bit. So it's still very heavily weighted for sellers, but it's starting to shift a little bit more to where the buyers are not quite on an equal footing yet, but they're getting there.
Interesting. What about the opportunities? I mean, you kind of outlined that here, but like, give us a little context in terms of what opportunities are out there and what are some of the hottest neighborhoods or hottest areas that you're seeing?
Well, and again, because we still have very tight supply, I think the overall supply in Fairfax County is right at a month, but it's more for condos. In that regard, it's those closer in condos that are in high rises that are still a bit more challenged from a seller's perspective, but that's also where the opportunity for the buyers are. The further out you go it's very different in Tysons than it is in Centerville, in part because the condo type in Centerville is very different than a high-rise kind of living.
The elevators.
Yeah, the elevators, you bet. And common interests and all that kind of stuff. And one of the great things that none of us can predict here is this Delta variant of COVID and what the impact may be, not only on our lives, but the real estate market in particular. Again, that's where my crystal ball gets really fuzzy on this. So, but COVID's still a thing, obviously, and it will still continue to impact the market, and I think that will continue to have some negative impact on high-rise living. But again, people are kind of getting over it, but they're not there yet. But it's a consequence. The condo market in Fairfax County is still softer than attached and detached homes, and we don't see anything that's likely to kind of change that relationship over the balance of the year. We do think there'll be some modest price appreciation in condos, probably in the 2 to 4% range. Always dangerous to put a number out there like this. So I'm glad this isn't being recorded or seen by anybody, Leo. But yeah, in any event, we think there'll be some price appreciation for condos coming back to the market, which is a good thing.
But let's talk a little bit about that, right? And I always want to bring this back to some of the great advice that you've given in the past. Real estate is the greatest hedge against inflation.
Sure is.
And this is not a flipper's market here, right? But like, if you're looking to hold on to real estate for a period of time, you are going to see returns. And I think that's super important for us to share that with our consumers, because oftentimes I think we lose perspective in terms of like the overall strategy when investing in real estate. So even though there's a 2 to 4 appreciation rate, hypothetically, potentially asterisk at the very bottom of the screen, right? You are saying that there's opportunity long term. You will see a return on your investment, even in the condo market.
You bet. Well, in fact, this is probably going a little bit off what we were going to talk about, but I know I alluded to it before about the impact, the long-term impact of continually low interest rates. And Shirley, I promise I'm going to get to more specifically about what you asked about Reston, but as we know, part of what has fueled this market isn't just demand, but the demand is not skyrocketing compared to where it was in 2018 or 19. It's certainly higher. The real difference in the market is inventory. The reality is people are staying in their homes longer, and that's one of the ways we rely on NAR's research. The median tenure of people staying in their homes 10 or 15 years ago was 5 or 6 years. It's 10 years now. People are just staying put longer. And think about this, and I don't know what the answer to this is, but we now have literally millions of homeowners that have either purchased a home or refinanced a home and have locked in a sub 3% mortgage interest rate. That's awesome, and it's part of what's fueled the market. Fast forward 4 or 5 years, and let's say rates are 4.5% or 5%, which is still, from a historical standpoint, unbelievably low money. If I was thinking about selling my home and it was discretionary, as opposed to I was getting moved across country or whatever, and I was looking at, I had a 2.875% mortgage interest rate that the clock had been running on for 5 years, I'm going to have to stop and really think about whether I want to make that discretionary move to buy that next house at a 5% mortgage interest rate. So the reason I bring it up in the context of the question that you just asked about return on investment, as we all know, like any commodity, this is a supply and demand equation. I think that one fact about the numbers of people that have locked in these incredibly low mortgage interest rates is going to contribute to a continuing low inventory situation. I mean, we've been in low inventory for some time now. There's not enough new homes getting built to meet household formation. And there's all sorts of public policy implications associated with that about accessory dwelling units and all the stuff that goes with that. But at a very fundamental level, we got a whole bunch of folks that are going to think twice about giving up their mortgage.
Yeah, and it kind of piggybacks well on what you said a couple of recordings ago. You said that we were having low inventory issues way before COVID, right?
This isn't COVID. Yeah.
So like, I mean, COVID obviously has added some more pressure,
Yep.
right? But to your point, like the low interest rate environment will continue and add yet maybe some additional pressure for potential sellers in the future.
Yeah.
That's very interesting.
Yeah.
That's very interesting there.
But I don't want to forget Shirley.
Shirley,
Shirley,
are you still here?
In terms of our projections, and really we're relying heavily not on the absorption rate research that we do, but the Bright Home Demand Index. We think the hottest areas in Fairfax County are going to be Burke, Centerville, South Alexandria, and Reston, Shirley. And Shirley, as I think you know, we have a kid as well as a niece and nephew that purchased in Reston this year. Really happy they did. Good time to be a seller in Reston. So this is the time to do it.
Yeah, I live in Reston, but I'm not selling my house.
Yeah. Potential inventory there, Shirley.
Potential.
Yeah.
Let's go to Loudoun County, right? So Loudoun County, I think in Prince William,
Yeah.
have been some of the hottest counties throughout this entire 2020 year into 2021. Like, project forward what you see in the rest of this year by looking obviously back and what's happening now.
Well, because they are very similar to each other in terms of market dynamics, I'm going to kind of put Loudoun and Prince William together, even though there's some different slides for them here. Hands down, of the jurisdictions that we cover, Loudoun and Prince William County have the hottest market from a seller's perspective, the most challenging one from a buyer's perspective as a consequence of that, and that's because of very tight supply. In Loudoun County right now, I think the overall supply is 0.4 months. And which is astounding. For townhouses, it's less than that. But Loudoun and Prince William have also entered in that category now where the market is starting to get a little bit softer in this regard. There are now more listings coming on the market than there are new contracts. Some of that's seasonal. That's not unusual for the summer. But compared to where we were in 2019 and 2020, that is a bit of a shift. So again, soft is a relative term. That means that overall supply in Loudoun County is likely to climb from 0.4 months to maybe a half a month or 0.6 months. So still really, really tight. But it is starting to ease up just a little bit. We tried to identify some of the hotter areas in Loudoun County, and the fact of the matter is every place in Loudoun County is hot. And in that regard, Loudoun, and I'll talk about Prince William in a second as well too, are very dissimilar to the other suburban markets about the condo market. Condo market in Loudoun and Prince William is every bit as hot as the attached and detached home market. And again, it's a supply-demand issue. There's relatively little inventory and relatively high demand. And so when we try to get more specific, and I won't, in the interest of time, go through everything that's on the slide here, but because of the size of the data sets that we work with, we kind of break Loudoun into 4 areas: Ashburn, Leesburg, and then eastern Loudoun and western Loudoun. All hot, all just really hot, but there's some specific price ranges that we looked at. Detached homes in Ashburn between 600 and $1 million we think are going to be the hottest part. And I won't go through this entire slide. And hopefully we can distribute this if anybody's interested afterwards. But it's all just really hot. Even the more rural parts of Loudoun County, western Loudoun, west of Leesburg, those are still really hot. And it's really hot for condos in relatively rural western Loudoun, really hot for condos. And we don't see anything on the horizon, the balance of this year, that's likely to change that. So those hot markets are going to continue to be hot, just not quite as hot as they were.
And that mirrors also Prince William, correct? I mean,
Yeah.
you and I talked about like that.
Yeah.
Prince William and Loudoun County, and for various reasons, you know, if you haven't already tuned in to like the previous recordings, you know, go on YouTube and watch them. But they mirror.
That'll get your Friday off on a great start. So
Yeah, exactly. But that really gives you, I mean, they're kind of similar to one another. Can you maybe touch a little bit on Prince William?
yeah, Prince William has slightly more supply right now than Loudoun. Loudoun's at 0.4 months. Prince William is half a month. Wow. And this is where, when you start wanting to play games with stats, our own projection is by the end of the year, the relative supply in Prince William County will likely be 0.8 months. That's a huge percentage jump to go from a half a month to 0.8 months. But realistically speaking, that's still just unbelievably tight.
That's great.
And it's the case pretty much across all price ranges and across all property types. We think that based on our research, the hottest areas in Prince William, make sure I get that right page, likely to be Haymarket, Gainesville, Woodbridge, and Bristow. Anybody that works that market, that's not exactly brilliant market insight. Those are the hot areas in Prince William.
They're like, duh.
Yeah,
We
exactly.
know.
Yeah,
Thanks for giving
yeah.
our secret away,
Thank
Dave.
you very much. Yes, indeed.
But this is great. And let's give another plug, because I think we can absolutely share this deck, this
Yeah.
slide. But that information is already in the market report
Yes, right.
that has been published, correct?
Correct.
And I think, and it's, you know, anyone can access it, you know, and the actual like website is McEnearney.com/market-report.
And Leo, it's my fervent hope that people will, one, look at it, and then 6 months from now, never remember what they read because it's likely wrong. So, yeah.
It's not wrong. It's not wrong. You haven't been wrong thus far. Let's wrap up with Maryland. Let's talk a little bit about Montgomery County and then go to Prince George's County, because I wanna end with this unbelievable market study that Bright has done recently. So I want you to definitely touch on that and maybe give the audience a little bit more context of that. But let's talk about Montgomery County and then Prince George's County.
Montgomery County, very strong market. Likewise for Prince George's County, dissimilar from each other largely because of price point, but still very strong. The supply in Montgomery County right now is 0.7 months, and that's for all property types combined. It's, no surprise, higher for condos than it is for attached and detached homes. But Montgomery County is in that same situation now as well too, which it was not in for some of the middle of 2020 through first quarter of this year, where we're now seeing more listings coming on the market than more new contracts. So again, supply is starting to ease up just a little bit. Our own guess is that for condos by the end of the year, we're probably looking at about a month and a half of supply, a little bit more than what it is right now. So again, that in terms of opportunities, particularly for those closer in condos, there's relatively more leverage that buyers will have for those closer in condos in Bethesda, Chevy Chase, for example, than they would in Germantown. And I know we've talked about this before. The housing stock, the condo stock in Germantown, I think Gaithersburg, is very different than the kind of condo that you'd find in Bethesda and Chevy Chase.
Mm-hmm. How does that translate to Prince George's County?
Prince George's County is almost as tight supply as Prince William and Loudoun County are, but the price points are very different. So we're still seeing in Prince George's County, unlike those Virginia suburban areas, there's still a bit of an imbalance for condos compared to attached and detached homes. It's still going to be a really hot market. We think that, and again, this is another one of those duh moments for anybody that works Prince George's County. The hottest areas in Prince George's County are likely to be Laurel, Bowie, Hyattsville, and Upper Marlboro, but there's some price points in there that are likely to be the hottest. And that's one of the great things about Prince George's County. These price points, if you look at some of the other stuff that we've done, these are all lower price points than they are for the other jurisdictions because that's representative of Prince George's housing stock. That's part of the reason Prince George's has continued to be hot, is that people that have been priced out of or discouraged by the very high prices in DC, or in some cases even in suburban Virginia, are finding relatively more affordable homes in Prince George's County. But I mean, our guess is that in Laurel, detached homes between 300 and 500 are likely to be the hottest. Bowie between 4 and 7. Hyattsville detached between 3 and 4, and attached homes between 2 and 4. So all that information is there. But again, people that work the Prince George's market is another one of those moments. Well, yeah, those are 4 hot areas, and they're likely to continue to be.
That's interesting. That's great. And I think, you know, the main takeaway from here is this, right? I think there are plenty of resources out there, right? And I think you've done a great job of not only like breaking that information out, looking back at 2020, how that compares to now, but also like arming the listeners, the audience that we have with tools that they can use. The biggest one that I hear here is obviously that market report, right? But the other ones are the stat pack that you put out, and internally for McEnearney is the absorption rates that you have. Let's end with this. Let's talk a little bit about this interesting study that you and I have been very fascinated about, because I think although there are amazing strategies when it comes to selling a property, their exposure to the greater audience is also extremely important for all of the consumers. So can you maybe touch a little bit about the BrightMLS off-market study that was just published?
Yeah, and thanks, Leo. I have my own biases and own convictions, but among them are basically this. Every seller should have a right to market their property how they choose to do so. If a seller wants to sell their property without using the multiple listing system, they absolutely should have the right to do that. And they should be able to be in a position to make an informed decision about that. And that's where this BrightMLS study comes in. My other bias is that whether it's real estate or almost any other commodity, a broad exposure to the marketplace will be best for the seller of that commodity. Being exposed to all of the potential buyers rather than a small subset of the buyers generally results in a better outcome for the seller of that commodity at a higher price. That's just, again, supply and demand. If you're, forgive me, artificially restricting the demand side, meaning if you're artificially restricting the number of buyers who have access to a commodity, it usually has an impact on price. So BrightMLS had commissioned a study that they've been working on for about 9 months. And yes, I know the study might be looked at as suspect because it's a multiple listing system that commissioned the study. And with candor, I'm on the Bright board as well, so I have my biases there as well too. But I also know with certainty how much effort Bright put into this study, and it was the methodology behind the study and the research. While it was done by Bright staff people, it was overseen and vetted by 2 PhD economists who are independent of Bright. Wow. So it doesn't mean that the study is perfect, but the study is pretty stunning. They looked at 500,000 transactions over the last 2 years and looked at the subset of those that were sold off market for sale by owners or whatever else versus the ones that were sold in the multiple listing system, and tried to get a correlation of similar property types and square footage, et cetera. And the results were almost a 17% difference. The median sales price was 17% higher for the homes that were sold through the multiple listing system than the ones that were sold off market. And future time we may go into a little more detail on this, but probably more important to the trends that we're seeing in the marketplace now, Bright was also able to take a look at those properties that were listed by a real estate company but were sold off market, that were done as a private exclusive and not put through the multiple listing system. And it's stunning how closely paralleled those results were. Almost a 17% difference, meaning lower to the seller of those off-market properties than the ones that were sold through the multiple listing system. Are there going to be exceptions to that? Absolutely, there's exceptions. Some people have fared very well by selling off-market. So I'm not knocking the concept, but it goes back to this whole context of what we were talking about here is information. We want our clients to be in a position to make an informed decision. And so we're hoping that people will pay attention to this Bright study and, if nothing else, question whether it really does make sense objectively to sell a property off market.
Yeah, I mean, I think at its core, what you're saying is that the more eyes that you have on a property, the more exposure, the more revenue potentially that will translate to a consumer. 17% is not. It's not a small chunk of change.
It's not insignificant.
Yeah,
I haven't met many sellers that want to walk away from 17% of the value of their house.
Absolutely, but that goes back to the original point. It's like, well, facts do tell a story, and I think it's important for us to arm ourselves with the correct facts, the correct knowledge, so that we can help our consumers make educated decisions, right? There are some clients that don't want the exposure. They don't.
And we have those clients too. We've done, not many, but we've done off-market listings as well too, because that's what our client has asked, and they should have the right to do that. We just want to make sure that they're making an informed decision.
Yeah, and I think overall, having tools like this, having resources like this, it's extremely important but also taking action and educating our consumers. And it goes back to everything we've been talking about in the last 6 months.
Yeah.
David, this is always educational for me, man. If no
And
one
for
else,
me too, Leo. So
I mean, all I did was ask questions, man. I don't know. Like, if nothing else, you know, like, you know, I've gotten a lot over the last 7 months from you, and I can't thank you enough for doing
Well,
this.
it's always my privilege, it's my pleasure, and likewise, I've gotten a lot from you as well too, including handling our daughter and niece and nephew and their home purchases.
And Reston.
Yeah, and Reston.
And Reston.
Thank you, Shirley.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, if you have enjoyed this time with us, we definitely appreciate you, you know, you tuning in. We're going to be doing this the rest of the year, so tell your friends about us. Tell your friends, your colleagues, you know, to tune in next month. Thank you again for jumping on, and we look forward to seeing you soon.
Thanks, everybody.